Good to see you all. It's our last session. Yeah, I'll start with a recap of what we covered up to now. And then we will finish with some final things that I'd like to share from the practical point of view, how to put these things into practice and actually experience them for ourselves directly. Because anything that remains just something you believe is not going to transform you. Anything that you simply understand intellectually with your mind, that alone is not going to transform you. What will make all the difference is to take this understanding and experience it directly for yourself and make it a living reality. And so that's where we will finish with a few pointers to things that we can do to try to put these into practice and experience them directly. All right, so with that, let me share some slides that we use first of all to recap, and then to go to the new material for today. So remember where we started. We said we begin by examining the external world that we find ourselves in and analyzing it and studying it systematically to understand what is its nature. And that's what science does. It looks at the behavior of nature, of the universe, to see what we can find out from that. And what's very clear is that science now for several hundred years has revealed a universe that is ordered and comprehensible, which means that it is understandable, it makes sense, it is rational, and it behaves according to laws, the laws of physics, and those laws are mathematically described using beautiful equations that can show us how it's behaving and allows us to even predict how it will behave. And that's the ultimate proof that we have a good understanding of the behavior because we're able to even predict what will happen. And this overall gives us a picture that this universe has a kind of a source to it. From philosophy, we pointed out that the universe is contingent. It is mumkin. There is no reason why it has to exist. It could have not existed. That's what we mean by it being mumkin. And the opposite of mumkin is something that is necessary. Wajib, has to exist, cannot not exist. And so the universe is mumkin. There's nothing about it that requires it to exist. And so it is actually very reasonable to believe that the universe therefore requires a conscious source to explain its ongoing existence. Why does it continue to exist? And why does it have this comprehensible order that we can understand using our minds and using tools like mathematics? Okay, that's a very reasonable flow of argument, logical argument to show how we get from science and to philosophy and come to this conclusion about the nature of the universe and the fact that it has a source. We then said, so that gave us the concept of God as the necessary being, wajib al-wujud, which is in modern terms, we can say he is the source of the laws of physics. And if you remember the quote from Stephen Hawking, the physicist, he said, what is it that breathes fire into the equations, into those laws of physics, and makes a universe for them to describe? What is it that breathes fire? So we say that this is what Wajib al-Wujud does. It provides that existence, that being, and allows those laws to become functional. But we then went a step further and said, well, in the traditional view of God, we think of God as a separate being. Okay, he's a great being, a being that is transcendent, separate from the universe. Okay, munazzah, separate from the universe, beyond the universe. But we saw that there are a lot of problems with this view. This is the traditional view that most people have of God: separate being, great being, but separate from us, different from the universe. And we saw that that leads to a lot of problems. It's a very simplistic understanding of God. And not by intention, inadvertently, by accident, it effectively implies a limited God. That's not the intention. But if you insist that God is not like his universe that he creates, he's separate from it, then that creates a boundary, a limit between God and the universe. This is God, this is not God. And that essentially means that God becomes limited. So we went through a lot of discussion about those problems with the traditional view, and the core issue being that you create a separation and therefore a limit to God's being and the being of the universe and everything in it. Right? So to overcome that, we developed a deeper, more sophisticated understanding of God's being. And we said that it is non-dual, infinite, self-aware being. That's what we developed as a deeper understanding of God. Non-dual, meaning that his being is infinite. There is no second being. Okay? There is no second being. This was the understanding that we have of the word ahad. The name al-ahad or ahadiyya is non-dual. There is no second because he is infinite. At the same time, is self-aware being, conscious, aware. So that being itself has consciousness as its fundamental nature. It is conscious and it is existing. Okay, so that's what we developed there, and the whole process of how then we develop from pure being to what is the universe? The universe and everything in it, like us, is a manifestation, a tajalli of that non-dual being, appearing through different forms. And so these beings do exist, but they don't have being separate from God's being. And so you can say that essentially they are just an appearance within the absolute. And so the world is an appearance. God alone is real. Okay. And we use this, my favorite analogy of the screen, as a way to try to understand how can that be? How can we have, infinite being? How does that give room for anything else to exist? What about my existence? What about your existence? How does that fit with God being infinite existence? And we said it's like a screen on which different appearances, different images can arise. Those images are not separate from the screen. but they're also not identical to the screen, right? They're different from the screen, but they're not separate from the screen. They share the being of the screen. They don't have a separate existence. And at the same time, though, the screen remains unaffected, untouched by anything that arises. Any images that arise, the screen is unaffected, untouched, unchanged by it, not limited by it. And nothing is like that screen. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Nothing is like that screen. Any image that arises is an image. It's not the screen. It cannot be a screen. It is simply an image. The screen itself is unlimited and nothing else is like it. There is only one screen. Everything else is just an image, a manifestation that appears in that screen. Okay. And I also mentioned that to me, what's beautiful about this understanding of God is that it is actually shared by all of the world's major spiritual paths. It has a name, actually. It's called the perennial wisdom or the perennial philosophy. Perennial means something that's always been there. Okay, it's ongoing. And it is this recognition of the oneness of being or the non-duality of being. And it is a common thread that runs through all of the world's spiritual traditions. So human beings in all over this planet, through time, through space, they have all come to this same conclusion about the nature of reality itself, and the nature of existence. Okay, so all of that was our focus in parts 1, 2, and 3. And we then went into understanding how that manifestation process unfolds. So the manifestation of being proceeds in stages. We discussed how it starts with pure being, and then it starts to then manifest as ahadiyya, then wahidiyya, which is a multiplicity of all of its attributes and its names, which is what we traditionally understand as God and his names, al-asma al-husna. And then from there, the names of God, these attributes combine to form different things. So everything, every entity in the world is the manifestation of some combination of God's attributes, of those sifat. And it all culminates, the conclusion of it is with the human being, the insan, and the insan becomes the mirror of God, able to reflect all and manifest all of God's attributes. And it is the human being's consciousness, specifically the ruh, which is, in my interpretation, the consciousness of the human being, is what allows him to be that perfect mirror, able to reflect all of God's attributes and to be the tajalli, the manifestation of the name Allah, which is the ism al-jami', the name that combines all the other names in it as well. And so why would it be that consciousness is what allows the human being to do all of this, to be this perfect mirror? It is because of the nature of consciousness. And we went into what is the nature of consciousness and what can we know about it. And we saw that, unlike what some people believe, consciousness is not generated by the brain. It is only correlated with the brain, right? We looked at how the brain works through this network of neurons firing between each other, different signals between them That's what the brain is. That's what the activity of the brain is. But what we saw is that we have correlation between brain activity and conscious experience, but correlation is not causation. They are linked to each other, but that doesn't mean that the brain is creating consciousness. That's not the case. And in fact, it's the other way around. What we know for a fact is actually the experience that we have. What we think of as matter, as physical matter, like the brain or like any other matter that we see, that's just an explanatory abstraction. We imagine that there's something out there made of something different from our conscious experience. And we assume that the external world must be made of that stuff called matter. But, and we seem to think in today's world, especially, most people think that matter is, it's a fact. It must be agreed on by everybody, that there is a material world out there. A physical material world is different to our minds, our consciousness. And that's just not true. You have to be very clear that matter is not a fact. Matter is what we can maybe assume that there is out there. What is a fact is our inner experience, because we can never step outside of that, our own minds, to experience anything called matter directly. Okay, so we spent quite a bit of time on that, but it just shows the importance of experience and consciousness as the primary fact of reality. It's not something that comes at the end. It's not something that comes after brains evolved. It actually comes first. All right, and then we spent some time going experientially and exploring the structure of ourselves, of the human being. And we saw that you can think of it as a three-dimensional structure. There's the external, which is the body, right? What we think of as a physical body. We then have the mind, right? Where we experience conscious events. But then when we look deeper, we saw that there is a third kind of dimension, which is the consciousness itself, which is we can translate as the ruh, or the spirit. And we then spent some time really isolating that consciousness to understand and see very clearly in our own experience that it is not the same thing as the mind or the body. It is something distinctly different from body and mind. And in fact, it is this witness of the body and mind, unchanging, and just simply witnessing what's happening in the body and the mind. And so we saw that consciousness is one, it is a unitary entity, it is unchanging, it is innermost to our being, and it is the knower of all experience. And that experience can be experience of the body, so different sensations that arise in the body, or perceptions of the external world, again coming through the body, and can be experienced and known by consciousness. Or it can be the mind itself, the contents of the mind, thoughts, emotions, memories. All of these are objects that consciousness is aware of. And so body and mind are consistent of many parts, always changing. The body and the mind constantly changing, and always external to us as consciousness. Consciousness internal, everything else is external to consciousness, and everything else is known It is not the knower. Body and mind do not know consciousness. Only consciousness is what knows body and mind. Okay, and then we said that, in a way, this is essentially making consciousness also like a screen. Just as we said, we can use the screen to understand non-dual being itself. We see that consciousness is also like that screen, where experiences arise on the screen of consciousness, but in the same way, they are not affecting consciousness in any way. They don't change consciousness in any way. And that's what we'll be spending most of the rest of today talking about, is that the underlying nature of consciousness and how it is like that screen, and seeing it for ourselves. Because this is the secret to all happiness. Seeing this fact is the secret to becoming permanently happy, because you'll see that nothing affects that consciousness. That consciousness has no wants, it has no needs, it is unaffected by anything, and therefore it is naturally fulfilled, happy, joyful. So that's where we're going today. All right, so that's the journey that we've been on, starting with science, then going to philosophy, and then coming into spirituality. Now, the rest of the time today, we'll go into the practice of these things, how to experience it directly and establish it for yourself and transform your inner world, so that this then becomes the source of happiness for you. Now, to do that, you have to do some preliminary work to get the body and the mind in the right condition to be able to really receive this and see it directly. If your mind is very disturbed and agitated, it'll be very difficult to get much out of what I'm about to share. And so I'm not going to spend too much time on those prerequisites. We did discuss them in a previous course where we looked at the techniques that we use to develop concentration, to settle and still the mind, and to become more fully present, right? The hudur al-qalb, and this presence, feeling yourself consciously present, your whole being present, not just concentrated in your head, which is where most of us spend most of our time thinking and imagining and playing movies in our minds all day long. So all of our consciousness focused at the mental level. What we talked about, what you've heard me describe before, is the need to then develop this bodily attention, where our conscious awareness is spread throughout our body and mind. And we see that that becomes a way for us to become much more concentrated in a more sustainable way. This mental type of attention has very limited capacity to remain concentrated. And so it doesn't work well. It doesn't allow you to penetrate deeper into these insights. And so this bodily attention allows us to have a much deeper capacity to be concentrated and to hold that concentration and sense of presence, clarity for longer. And that then becomes the basis on which we will then go on to exploring being and consciousness directly. So I'm just saying that this is a prerequisite. If you really are serious about taking this forward, then you need to spend time and invest in yourself to develop these tools of concentration and presence. And we have details of that in the prior course that we did about Salah. And maybe we can spend a separate course on just focusing on these techniques. But for now, I'm going to assume that that is something that is already developed in you and allows you to then explore beyond just the surface of the mind and go much deeper. Okay, so with that, we'll start with two types of exercises. Okay, one is really focused on being, on wujud, experiencing this non-dual being, and then we'll go on to experiencing consciousness itself directly. Okay, so we start with this first one, experiencing being itself. All right, now a lot of these things, I can only use words to point to certain things that you need to explore for yourself. So these are just simply pointers and some guidance to use to then explore for yourself. Because if you just look at them as words, they may not make a lot of sense, or it may seem a bit confusing. You have to put in the time and the effort to try and explore it for yourself. Now, for this exercise, we actually do it with eyes open. Okay, so we're actually looking at the external world, because where do we experience being? We experience being both internally but also externally. When I look out to the world, I see objects that exist. And so that's where we're going to encounter and interact with being, with wujud. When we come to the internal, we will be able to see being and consciousness. Consciousness is what dominates internally, and being is what dominates our experience externally. So that's why we do this exercise, focusing on being with our eyes open. Okay. And I'll just walk through a few steps of what to do and how to approach it, and then we can discuss. So we start by just looking at any object. Okay, we said that everything is a manifestation of one non-dual being. So every object, everything has that existence in it. So you can look at any object. No particular object is required, no special object, any object. Let's say a table. Let's say you have a wooden table and you look at that object. Now, what's happening when you do that? See that the table exists. Now, that's, like I said, the words are going to sound like really obvious. Like, I mean, what do you mean? It's like, this is very basic. Why are you telling us to think about the table exists? Well, because most of the time, if you think about it, you're not paying attention to the fact that the table exists. You just say there's a table, right? You're aware of the existence of the table. You see the table and you say, I see table. I say to you, no. When you see the table, see that you are actually having two experiences. Okay, you're having two experiences. You are seeing table, but you're also seeing that table exists. You see, there's a subtle difference there. There is table, I'm experiencing table. Okay, I see table. But embedded in that, within that statement, there is also the fact that the table exists. So actually what's happening is, I see table exists. I see that table exists. There's two parts to that, table and exists. Okay. Now, focus on the existence of the object, not on its details. Okay. So every object that we look at, whatever it is, we see that it has a particular form, right? And we give it a particular name. Like in this example, table. Table is, it has a form, right? It has a shape. It has a color, it has texture. All of that is part of its form. and we give it a name, table. Okay. And so if you look at the table, you can get very focused on the details, right, of the table. What color is this table? What is it made of? What is its shape? How big is it? You could get lost in those details. And most of the time, that's what happens. We get lost in those details, in focusing on the form and the name. What we're saying here is, in a way, almost you have to go out of focus as you look at it. Just focus on the fact this table exists. It is here. It's present. It's shining in front of me. It has being. Okay? So it's a very subtle thing. It needs exploration. But the idea is, don't focus on the details and the form. Focus on the fact that it exists. Okay? Now, see that that existence, okay, the existence of the object is not actually separate or different from the existence of other objects. Okay. So again, what we focus on is what makes things different from each other, right? Most of the time, the table is not the same as the chair. Table is one thing, chair is something else. That's the name and form. Name and form are different, but the existence of that table and the chair are the same. Table exists, chair exists. They both exist. One doesn't exist more than the other. Does it exist in a different way from the other? It doesn't. Anything that makes them different is form, not the fact of their existence. So see that they exist side by side, and the existence of them is not different from each other. Only the form is what's different about them. They equally exist. They are not different from each other in terms of their existence. Okay? And now what you do is, it's a kind of a mental thing that you do, but you drop the name and form. In your mind, you kind of just, again, almost like it make it blurred in your vision. I'm not saying make it blurred, but in a way, with your mind, just ignore, drop the name and the form, and just relax into seeing that this is all one infinite ocean of existence. There's actually no separation between them. If I hold two objects in front of you now, okay, look at these two objects, this ball, this pen. Okay, you're going to say, well, this is an object, this is an object. They're separate from each other. They are different from each other, right? There's air in between. There's space in between them. But if you look at the existence, this ball exists, this pen exists, but guess what? The space, the air between them also exists. There's no break in existence. It is undivided. It's just one existence. These are just names and forms. They all equally exist. The ball exists, the pen exists, the space between them exists. Now, if you look at things in this way, you see that it is an infinite ocean of just existence. Just don't focus on the name and form. For a moment at least, try to just see all of it just exists. See that common, underlying, shared being that all of them have in this ocean of existence. Okay. And this becomes a technique that you can practice. You sit and practice this. Actually sit, spend time doing nothing else, but just observing things with this perspective. And then you will see what Imam Ali is saying when he says, ما رأيت شيئا إلا ورأيت الله قبله وبعده ومعه وفي. Everything. ما رأيت شيئا. Everything. So how can that be? Hopefully you can see this is a technique, a practice you can do to stop seeing things without God. Stop seeing forms and names and see that all of it exists. And that existence, that being, is God's being, as we discussed before. Non-dual, infinite being. These are just different forms arising in that infinite ocean. Okay, so that's the external practice, focusing on being. Next, we go to the internal practice. And here we're going to focus on consciousness, because consciousness cannot be experienced externally, right? As we said, you can know yourself externally, you can see your body, but internally, you can be aware of your own conscious experiences. And you can only do that for yourself. You cannot experience consciousness outside of yourself, right? So we experience being outside of ourselves. We don't experience consciousness outside of ourselves. We can only experience conscious experiences internally. So if we want to really focus on consciousness and experiencing it directly, then we need to look internally. Okay, so external for being, internal for consciousness. Now, consciousness also exists. It also has being. So you can also experience being internally, right? We just did it externally. You can do it internally as well. But internal is, in a way, dominated by consciousness. So that's why when we turn inwards, we focus on consciousness. So here we do this practice looking inwards. And so we do it with eyes closed, looking within our conscious experience. Okay. And we're going to follow similar steps. We're going to start with any particular thought. Okay. Any thought. I gave the example last time, 2 + 2 = 4. That's a thought. Okay. You can take that thought or any thought that arises in your mind. Any thought. Okay. What we do now, in a similar way, this thought that has appeared in my mind, notice that you are illuminating that thought. Okay. It's not just that there is a thought. All right. It is that you know that there is a thought. You are aware of the thought. Right? There's two things going on. Just like when we said externally, table exists. Table is one thing, but then I can see that it exists. There's two experiences happening. Internally, same thing. There is a thought appearing in my mind. I am aware that there's a thought appearing in my mind. I know the thought. There's two things happening, thought and knowing of thought. Two experiences are there. Focus on this. See that you are knowing the thought. You are illuminating the thought. Now, next step, drop the thought. Just stop thinking about that thought. Just drop it. And relax into that awareness that's shining on the thought. So you become aware there's a thought. You're aware now that I am aware of the thought. Now just drop the thought and remain with the awareness. Okay. So there's a way for you to kind of imagine this, just so that it becomes a bit clearer. And then when you do it internally, maybe this will help. So the example is the mirror, okay? And we're going to follow similar steps now, but just imagine right now you're looking at a mirror, okay? You see the reflection of your face in the mirror, okay? That's the first thing that happens. Oh, I see my face, right? Like in this picture here, I see my face. But now become aware that I am seeing myself reflected in the mirror. You see how there's two things going on? There's the reflection, but then there's the awareness. Ah, I am seeing my reflection. I am aware of the reflection. Okay, that's step 2. But now ask yourself, are you the reflection? Are you the reflection? No, you are not the reflection. You are not the reflected face. So what you do now is drop the mirror and simply know that you are the real face, the real observer of the reflection. You see? It's as though sometimes what happens, it's as though we've forgotten that we have this face. We've forgotten who we are, and we're just focused on this image appearing in the mirror. Oh, that's me. The reflection is me. I'm seeing myself. That's me. That's me. That's me. And we've forgotten that you are not the mirror or the face appearing in the mirror. You are the real face. You're the real face. So in this experiment, what you do is you're seeing yourself in the mirror. You are becoming aware that, oh, I am seeing my face in the mirror. Now drop this mirror and just be aware. Know that you have a real face. You are the real face, the real observer. And just relax into that knowing. You don't need to do anything else. Okay? So again, back to the thought. He said, focus your attention on any thought that comes to your mind. Be aware that you are aware of the thought. Now drop the thought and just experience being the one that knows that thought, the one that knows that the thought is gone. Just that one, that pure awareness, pure knowing. This is how you connect directly with this pure consciousness that is the deepest dimension of you. Okay, so that's the second exercise, all right? So here you see how we're focused on consciousness, the one that is aware. And so you can use any thought that arises, any feeling, any emotion. Right now you feel sad. That sadness, make it your focus. I feel sadness inside me. Now you feel that there. Now be aware. I know that I am sad. I am aware of the sadness. Now just put aside the sadness and focus on the one that is just aware of it. And then just relax into it. After that, you don't need to do anything else. Just be there. Just stay there. And you will experience that pure witness consciousness. Okay. Now, all of that, all of those type of exercises are really building up to, these are ways for us to become more acquainted, more familiar, more used to looking at existence and consciousness and practicing it. But they come together really in the most basic and the most fundamental practice that we have, the practice of pure being, I am. And I've shared this with some of you before, but let's just look at this again. In the same way that we just did that with external and internal, same practice really. It's the same as the one that we just did, but you're just focusing on that I am, feeling that you exist without and before all thoughts, all feelings, all sensations, just that existence, that awareness of being. And focus on this natural sense, okay, that's there. Observe the thoughts and the emotions that arise, but you remain grounded, you remain anchored in just the sense that I exist, I am. Okay? And so you shift your attention away from the objects, focus on that background, the witness in the background that is seeing all of this happening. Okay, and then again, shift the attention, ignore the objects, drop them, focus exclusively on that background and stay there. And the important thing here is that you start to become more familiar and experience what is the nature of that witness, that awareness. What is it like? What does it feel like? What does it what is the experience of it feel like? What do you experience there? And what you see for yourself, and don't take my word for this, experience it for yourself, you'll see that it is at perfect peace. Objects come and they go, and sometimes there's agitation in the mind, there's sadness, there's anger, there's whatever. But that witness, that deeper part of you, is unbroken peace. It is not disturbed by anything that's happening. Pure peace. And just a natural sense of happiness and joy is there. You'll also feel that there are no boundaries there. Okay. Most of the time we feel boundaries. We're bounded within this body and this little mind. But that witness, you don't feel boundaries. It feels incredibly vast and spacious. And this is very important. The body and the mind constantly have wants and needs and never feel happy and satisfied with what they have, always looking for something next, what's next, what's next. But that witness in you, you will see that has no wants, it has no needs. That's a very good test of whether you are actually experiencing it or not. If you still feel wants and needs and something pulling you, wanting to think about something different or seek something different, then you're not there yet. This witness has no wants, it has no needs. And I share these three names of God as a way to see that the nature of that witness is divine. It shares these characteristics of God. It is haq, it is true, it exists. You'll see this is a practice of I am. You'll feel that existence directly. That's al-haq. Al-shaheed is very clear. It is the witness. He's witnessing, and this ruh, this witness, is directly in contact with that witness, that ultimate witness. And as-salam, this pure peace that can never be disturbed, is its fundamental nature. And you can experience that for yourself. And thereby it becomes a gateway for us to experience God's presence and the nature of God. You can experience it directly through your own being, through the nature of your own being, your own consciousness. Because it's simply a manifestation within that infinite being and consciousness. All right. And so this way we can open up into God's presence, because his presence cannot be experienced if you're not grounded in your own presence. You need to be present in order to experience his presence. Okay, so you ground yourself in your own experience, in your own presence, empty the mind, become aware of this lack of boundaries, and wait silently there, knowing that he is with you everywhere. وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ. There is nowhere closer that you can be than this dimension within you. It's the closest point of contact, you can say, with God himself. Okay. And here I want to share a beautiful poem from my favorite poet, Farid al-Din al-Attar, who speaks about this place. He calls it the door of the heart. Okay, and I'm going to play a little bit of a beautiful reading of this this poem. So I hope you enjoy this. Just relax into it and see what he's saying.
ای دل اگر عاشقی، ای دل اگر عاشقی، در پی دلدار باش، در پی دلدار باش، بر در دل روز و شب، بر در دل روز و شب، منتظر یار باش، منتظر یار باش. ای دل اگر عاشقی، ای دل اگر عاشقی، در پی دلدار باش، در پی دلدار باش، بر در دل روز و شب، بر در دل روز و شب، منتظر یار باش، منتظر یار باش. بر تو جاودان در در دل حاضر است، دل بر تو جاودان بر در دل حاضر است. روزن دل برگشا، روزن دل برگشا، حاضر و هوشیار باش، حاضر و هوشیار باش.
So he's saying that there is a place within you, that deepest point where we've been pointing to, which he calls the door of the heart, and he's always there. He's always there, present by the door of the heart. So you just stay there. Be there, present and alert, awake to his presence right there. Okay. So this is to be explored personally and seen directly. That if you want to experience God's presence, there is nowhere else you will experience it more intensely than exactly that same place that I'm referring to as your witness, the witness within you. All right, and now just to wrap it up, I'll say that what we see for ourselves when we spend time there is that the nature of consciousness itself, the ruh itself, its nature is peace, happiness, and love. And I'm going to use this crystal as the example again, but this is what I want to point to. Consciousness is dimensionless. It doesn't have any size. It doesn't have any limits. It doesn't have any boundaries. And so it is infinite in this dimension. What you also see from spending time there is that it is unaffected by anything. That means that it is peace. Its nature is peace because nothing can disturb it. If something is unaffected by anything else, then it is always at peace. It lacks nothing. Okay? It has nothing missing that it's looking for or needs, and therefore it is naturally happy. The happy here means fulfilled, no sense of anything missing or lacking or wanting or needing. Okay. And what you'll also see there, because it doesn't have boundary, there is no separation. Right? There is no boundary between you and everything else. And that is, in another way, expressed as there is pure love there. Love is that sense of unity with everything else. And so, when you overcome any kind of sense of separation, that's when you feel love. You feel oneness with other things. And so those are the fundamental true attributes of your true nature. You are that peace, that happiness, and that love. That is what you are. That is the nature of consciousness, the nature of your ruh. Now, the last thing I want to share, this is the last thing in the course. I mentioned this example of the crystal before, but I just want to emphasize it one more time, because what happens is, these sound like beautiful words, and maybe we temporarily might experience them, when we meditate or when we pray, we may feel these attributes, peace, happiness, love, but they don't seem to last long. And most of the time, we don't feel them, right? We feel opposite of peace, agitation. We feel opposite of happiness. We feel sadness and suffering. And we don't feel love. We feel an absence of love most of the time. And things constantly disturb us. So why is that? What's going on? And again, this example of the crystal is what I want to end with, because if you see this clearly inside, it helps to really overcome this misunderstanding that is causing our unhappiness. And how does this work? Like I said before, this crystal itself is perfectly clear. It has no colors. It has no, internal form of any kind. I know it has a shape, but just imagine it's an infinite crystal in this way. It's only when I bring it close to something else that it takes on the color of that, right? If I show the color of what I'm wearing under here, This darker color, it makes it look dark. This lighter color makes it look light. So what happens in life, what's happening in life is that when different emotions or feelings or thoughts or sensations come from the body or from the mind, that's just like these different colors that appear. And your consciousness, because it's close to them, it seems to take on the color, the shape, the feeling of those emotions and thoughts and sensations. But what you can see is that the crystal always remains perfectly clear and unaffected by whatever is reflected in it. It's not affected by it. It seems to be taking on the color and the shape and the form of those feelings and emotions. I feel sadness, I feel anger, I'm in pain, I feel pain from the body. But if you look deeper, you see that those things are only feelings, sensation, objects appearing in the consciousness that you are. The consciousness itself doesn't change, is not affected by those. It remains perfectly clear, pure, and a state of peace, happiness, and love at all times. It's there. It is there. See that for yourself, and that way become free from the ups and downs of life that keep us in a constant state of suffering and separation, and not feeling God's presence, not feeling connection with other things, other people, always feeling some kind of a boundary there. It's all because we've confused the crystal from the objects that are appearing. Look deep inside and you see that actually you are perfectly okay all the time, even though you don't feel that way. If you shift the attention to that witness, you'll see that that sadness and is there, but it's not affecting you. Doesn't make the sadness disappear. Doesn't make the pain disappear. It just shows you that this is not touching you. You are aware of these things. You're experiencing that you're not affected by them. And that's what I mean by the secret to all peace and happiness that we can have. I'll stop there. Thank you.